success is uncomfortable. It's a fact, and there's no shortcut to success. You have to go through that process of discomfort, but that's also a process of discovery. So you ask yourself this all-important question: if only I had ... And then the big question for all of us is, what will our ... be?
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Keynote Curators podcast. I'm Seth Deckman, your Keynote Curator. Our guest today is Sandro Forte. Sandro, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Seth. It's really kind of me to have you on your show. I feel like a bit of imposter syndrome going on right now, but thank you so much. I really am very humbled.
Well, you're very welcome. And as a listener, you will learn from our podcast that imposter syndrome is technically actually not a syndrome. It's something that we all deal with. And we're gonna uncover that today, and we're gonna dispel that myth of yours that you're an imposter, because from personal experience, I know not only as a keynote speaker and the professional work you do and the family that you've created that there's nothing imposterish about you. So I'd like to just get right into the deep end, right into the deep water, and talk about your book. And, you signed a copy for me. And, the title of it is Dare to be Different. And it really encapsulates a lot of your personal story and a lot of your professional experience. But I'd like you to share with us the mindset and the psychology around how being different, or daring to be different, if you will, is a secret sauce, an ingredient, a way to distinguish you or anybody in what they're up to in life.
Well, that's a big question. I will try and do this as succinctly as I possibly can.
Sandro, we have 3 or 4 days. So just, grab a cup of coffee and let's start.
Perfect. We'll do it in chapters then, Seth.
Very good.
I suppose probably the best way to answer that question, Seth, is to take you back to my childhood. I lost my father to cancer when I was very young. I was the eldest of 4 children. My mum was a widow at the age of 29. And we were kind of the riches to rags story, because my father was a very successful entrepreneur, and we lived in this big house, and everything was perfect in our life. And then within a couple of years of my father passing away, my mother had lost everything. And the primary reason for that was because there was no plan in place, and she didn't have any business acumen, and things happen like that. So not in itself a particularly tragic story, but a great life lesson for me as a young man growing up. And I stepped into what was left of the family business to help my auntie, who had taken over from my father. And I learned one very important lesson, which was hard work makes up for a lack of talent. But when I was 21 and I'd finished university, I needed a job, as so many people do, and started working in financial services for no other reason than it was really the only job going at the time. I can honestly say I did not wake up when I was 14 and think, goodness, I couldn't think of anything more I'd rather do than be a financial advisor. So there I was, plying a trade, not really knowing what I was doing. But one thing, and this is to your question, one thing that was really burning away at me was I was being told how to do something. I was being trained from a manual that had been around for 100 years. Everyone had done it the same way, and it just didn't feel very effective. And this is kind of like an analogy for life as well, because I was going through this process time after time after time, and the ROI, my return on investment for the blood, sweat, the tears, it was pretty poor. And so what I did, and I can't explain why, but I guess maybe because of the experience that I'd gone through with my family, I started to look at really every single aspect of the process. And process is a word I use a lot when I speak, and positioning is another one. But this whole unique selling proposition doesn't necessarily come from, coming up with an ingenious idea that no one's ever thought of. Sometimes it just comes from challenging the status quo, of looking at something and thinking, is this really effective? Do I just follow, what everyone else has done to get the same result? Or do I just push back a little bit and ask myself the question, not necessarily radically change something. There are not many new ideas in life anymore, but how can I just improve this process, maybe by 10%, and do it in such a way that I just achieve a better result more quickly? And that in itself, Seth, is kind of like the USP. So A couple of great examples. People don't necessarily go to McDonald's for a great meal, and they don't go to Starbucks for a great cup of coffee necessarily. But there is a reason why those companies are super successful. And we could talk about this all day, but one of the things that they really trade off is this idea of consistency. So one of the things that I've done in my business to build trust, build great relationships, and establish a really robust mindset is to build a consistent process. And in my profession, the fact that I speak now almost as much as my day job activity, but that whole process engenders trust because people come to rely on it. And I think that was the big differentiator for me. So in my book, all I do is I talk about the ways I push back against the conformists, the ones that are happy being comfortable in life. And this is something again that I speak of. I talk about the Discouragement Club, as you know, and that's the group of people that we come across in life and business. And really, it's their sole responsibility to stop other people progressing because they feel comfortable where they are in life, a little ambitionless. But when they see other people being pulled back from achieving great outcomes, they're kind of happy. So really, the thing about the Discouragement Club is that we've got this group of people in life whose focus, their main primary purpose in life is to stop the likes of you and I achieving the things that we are capable of achieving because they just feel comfortable where they are. And, we know that success is uncomfortable. It's a fact. And there's no shortcut to success. You have to go through that process of discomfort, but that's also a process of discovery. So for me, that little voice on my shoulder that we've all had it since we were about 7 or 8 years old. Prior to that, there was no filter. There was no little voice that said at the end of a calendar year, when you'd set all these really amazing goals because you'd kind of opened up the emotional part, the right side of your brain on the 1st of January, and you created all these incredible goals. And then at the end of the year, when you don't achieve the goals for various reasons, the little voice has this kind of habit of saying, well, don't worry, Seth, there's always next year. And then you just kick the can down the road. Until, unfortunately, at some point in the future, you look back over your shoulder and you ask yourself this all-important question. And the question is, if only I had ... And then the big question for all of us is, what will our ... be? And because of my experience at a young age, I really got to that conclusion at a relatively young age. I was in my early 20s. And I just thought, what? I'm just not prepared to accept what people would have me believe life should be. And so I just looked at every single aspect of my life and the business, and I just tore it all apart and rebuilt it by just trying to improve every component part. And that really forms the basis of the success of my business in the UK. And I know success is different things to different people, but that really is one of the key messages that I take to what is now 90 countries in the world, sharing ways, because Seth, the reality is that we have all achieved extraordinary success by following that process. What happened was we just got a bit distracted. Things, the Discouragement Club, the little voice on the shoulder, but we are all fundamentally brilliant human beings. But we just got to get back to following that same process that we adopted all those years ago, which was born of two things. One was someone showed us how to do something, typically our parents. And then by repetition, we would perfect until we got to the right outcome. And I wouldn't say it's as simple as that, but those are the two fundamental principles for achieving, frankly, anything you want to achieve in life.
There's a lot there to unpack, but, a couple of things that really spoke to me is consistency. And that could be consistency in your business processes or consistency in how you operate or behave in personal or professional relationships, whether it's your health and well-being, you're working out, it's raining, but you still want to go out and do that run, or the gym is, going to close in the next 2 hours, but you need to get to it. And just having that fortitude, and as your book title says, dare to be different. It is a mindset. I can't help but acknowledge and I feel I've said this to you in person. We were recently in Europe at an event where you spoke at. Is that proper English? Where you spoke at? I'm from New Jersey, so I think I can get away with it. Our backgrounds of experience, our fathers died when we were young. We went from riches to rags. Our mothers were left at the helm, kind of finding our way professionally and learning these lessons. And it takes a fortitude. And as a young man, in the moment when you're in that storm, I don't recall ever saying to myself, you know what, Seth, I'm going to dare to be different. I want to be in that other 10, that shorter 10%, or even that 7% that you mentioned in your book. It's a fine line between being on the court of life as opposed to an academic concept and cutting your teeth and finding your way. And then along the road, you're able to crystallize and distinguish those concepts. Does that communicate? Because I know in the beginning when it took years for you to really get some traction in the business, in the financial services business profession, which it does. That's just the nature of the game. It takes time to establish a network and find your voice. But along the way, there is that moment where we bring an awareness or a consciousness to our mindset, and then it harnesses in a different way. Does that communicate?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. I think you've articulated that really well. If I can maybe add a slightly different approach, but it means
that's what I was hoping for. I was doing something rhetorical, hoping that the expert would come in and clean it up.
Well, I think the expert here is the interviewer today, right? So, the fact of the matter is that when you have, and this is what I discovered, and I think those that I've talked to about psychology and mindset, and that is a fundamental principle to achieving really anything you want to achieve. But what I discovered, Seth, was, through a process of trial and error, lots of failure, if you want to call it that, not achieving the outcomes that I sought to achieve. I learned an awful lot, taking a step back to take a couple forward. We've heard that one before as well, and it's easier said than done. But when I discovered the secret to really building a robust, bulletproof mindset, you talk about, training outdoors. I did it once in a hailstorm in Italy. It was like -4. And consciously, there was not one bit of me that wanted to train that day. But subconsciously, it had become such a habit that I just it was like an out-of-body experience. So once you get to that point, this is what I learned, Seth, which is whenever I engage with people, and whether it's as a speaker, whether it's as a financial professional, I have a confidence. I would hate to think of it as arrogance, but you have a confidence where when you are with somebody, again, historically in financial services, but in many businesses, it's customer led. And what I mean by that is the salesperson, the supplier is very much dependent on whether the customer says yes or no. And I'm kind of generalizing here. And the outcomes and the way we see success has always been determined by the outcome. So if someone says yes, we're successful. If somebody says no, we're a failure. And that's a problem. On the other hand, if you focus on the process, you are authentic, you are genuine, you focus on the relationship, and I've carried this into my speaking career, I think, then you change the dynamic in a relationship because you have two people that are equally committed to a successful outcome, whatever that successful outcome looks like. And if one party walks away from the other, then philosophically, you can look on that as a job well done because you still followed the process. You have no control over the outcome. But what it does is it changes the positioning in your mind from success or failure to success every time because you are true to a process, in my case, to help others, achieve successful, tangible results. And that was a major shift for me. It was kind of like an epiphany, if you like. And I discovered that at the age of about 24 and really built on it, sought to understand more, wrote a book about it. Hopefully have tried to pass that on to what is now well over 1 million people around the world.
Well, you have. And, you talk about the habit and the cost of not going out in -4 in a hailstorm was greater than it was too great to pay. The benefit was greater than the cost of not going. And I'm similar. Here I am looking in the mirror again. I'm turning into a copycat. But, I get to a point where I do my health and well-being, let's call it my fitness for the day. And if conditions are, whether it's the weather, whether it's the time circumstances, some interruption of life that occurs, whether it's family or a doctor or work appointment that I can't, even if I'm going to do half of what I typically do, that habit, and that's why I love the word inhabit. You're inhabiting a process. You're inhabiting the process of ongoingly doing something in a repetitive manner. So when you say it might sound arrogant, to me, you're inhabiting a process that then has produced a certain level of results that you're informed by in your unique experience, whether it's you, Sandro, or any of our listeners out there. Over time, it's informing you that I can count on this process and I can count on it to produce at X level. The largest room in the house is room for improvement. There is no roof in the building we live in. We're constantly looking to expand and grow. If you're not growing, you're shrinking, all that kind of mindset. But this consistency, the Starbucks, the McDonald's that you grow to rely on is a great metaphor for your book and the mindset and the psychology, which I know not only do you study, but you just have this natural proclivity for it of understanding what it takes to succeed. I just love how you put it in your own terms.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. I'd like to move on from this topic, but it's somewhat related. And I want to talk about security. And I don't necessarily mean malware or the lock on your door or, a burglar, a security system in your home so that nobody comes in and robs it. I just want to generally talk about the value of security. For event professionals that you deal with all the time, because you've spoken at the $1 Million Roundtable, you've spoken at Top of the Table, you've spoken, is it 90 countries? 90 countries. Luxembourg was the 90th, where we were just 2 weeks ago or so. Security is very important for them. Yeah. And again, security at an event, if you have a big name speaker like Sandro Forte and you want to make sure that they're not bothered by the paparazzi. But in all seriousness, job security, not that they're going to go to HR and say, I want a 5-year contract with guaranteed raises and bonuses, more that they're in tuned with growing their capacities, development, professional development. And how, I'd love to get your take on how an event professional, whether it's somebody early in their career or later on, how they can utilize this mindset that we've established in expanding their capacities as a professional.
Wow, that's another big topic that we'll try and unwrap very succinctly.
Take your time. Again, we have about 2.5 days left, so keep going.
Fantastic. So here's my take on it for what it's worth, Seth. I think that if I can kind of cut this up into 2 pieces. Firstly, I'm very cognizant of the fact that as a speaker, and I've had the privilege actually, and I recommend all speakers should do this. I've also had the opportunity to run events. So I know from firsthand experience the difference between a speaker that's really easy to work with and one that's not very easy to work with. And I talk about value and price a lot, and we might go down that road, we may not. But in terms of security for me, I talk a lot about, as you know, Seth, a lot about left and right brain as part of this whole mindset psychology piece. And again, to unpick that for those who perhaps don't study or haven't really thought about this, there are 2 very distinct parts of our brain. And I talked briefly earlier about conscious, subconscious. Now we're talking about left and right brain. So the left part of our brain typically is responsible for logic and the right for emotion. So when I'm typically engaging with an audience, when I'm engaging with a client, for example, I want to be very mindful of the fact that I have got to be communicating with both sides of the brain. What I see going on an awful lot is people lead with the right side of the brain. They talk about, the relationship and how it's important, and they make lots of decisions on a very emotional level and neglect the really logical stuff that underpins that emotional connection to something. And conversely, there are others that focus purely on the logical, here are all the reasons we should do something, and they don't engage on an emotional level. So what I say to those, if we're talking about job security for a second, and I'm gonna come up with almost like the antithesis, I think, of what you would expect me to say here. For me, job security, if we use that as the analogy for a second, is not about accepting a job that you know is probably going to be around for the next 30 years on a certain level of income. And don't get me wrong, Seth, there are lots of people that would be very happy with that, just as there are lots of people in an audience where with the very best speaker in front of them, they are still going to do absolutely nothing as a result of what they've heard. That's a fact of life. And I always challenge audiences, recognizing that 50% of the audience will do absolutely nothing. Even if you hand them a solution on a plate, they won't do anything with it. But of those that really do want to, to get going, to move to the next level, to fulfill positive outcomes, then it's very much about, and I would say this to the job security seekers, particularly when you're young, when there's less at stake, try lots of different things, because what you learn very quickly is not just what you do want from life and business, but what you don't want from life and business. And, I held down half a dozen jobs because I had to help my mum. And, there were lots of things I wanted to be emotionally, but when I learned about the logical aspects of that decision-making process, it didn't work, didn't pull enough money, for example. So interestingly, I would say that be very aware of and cognizant of the fact that to make great decisions and to achieve great outcomes, to build amazing relationships, to find security in life, you need to be in touch with both sides of your brain and find a balance between the two. Because if it's one or the other, then you are probably going to make an emotional decision and regret it, or you will make a logical decision and it will be very uninteresting because you're not emotionally connected. And that's about as quick as I can answer that question.
No, I mean, that's great. Here's where I went with listening attentively to, your answer is, especially if you're younger in your career, not just because I'm going to willy-nilly try new things, but there's a new opportunity, a different role, or a project, take it on. Get your hands on as much of a breadth and a variety and a wide range of experience, especially when you're young. But, the future of work and the post-pandemic work mindset, if you will, about a blend of working from home, remote work, back to the office, and every iteration of corporate mandate that's around. Every culture and every company, different size, different industries have approached it differently. But if you're young in your career, I think that you're going to suffer most if you're only and exclusively doing remotely, because that magic of being around the water cooler or walking in from the parking lot or getting up in the elevator or taking a lunch break or in the hallway, making eye contact with somebody and saying, oh, you know what? I'm glad I caught you. I want to get your take on this idea. Or I'm not a junior in my career, but if I run into somebody in my work and I want to, hey, let's go into the conference room. I want to run this by you. Or how is this person doing? I think it's really important, as far as in the context of job security goes, is to have that interaction, that magic, that spark of kind of being in the office. And that has nothing to do with a course you're taking or a new certification or a promotion or a guaranteed raise. It just has to do with being hungry and having your mind on connecting with people and learning from the widest range of experience early in your career as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly to my point. I think we're aligned in our thinking there, and really, perhaps I didn't articulate it very well, but to your point, Seth, the one part of that social interaction, that's the emotional connection that we all need. Conversely, when people say to me, I can't possibly build relationships via Zoom, you can still run a business, you can still run a conference, but is it the same on the same level as social interaction? Because that's the way, as human beings, we are largely built. The answer is absolutely no. So I think we're saying the same thing in slightly different ways, but are absolutely aligned in what we're saying.
Yeah, no, totally. And again, I emphasized in my soliloquy and my monologue a little bit about more of an emphasis on younger in your career, but I think it's across the board, because like you said, there are cues in that side of your brain that you just, when you're one-on-one or physically within a group dynamic, there's subconscious communications, whether it's a glance, a head tilt, body language, that are being registered that communicate on such a high level where people can understand something with a deeper sense that you're just not going to get in Zoom. And so many times I can tell you that in person, I've been able to, whether it's gain a new account, expand an existing account, or provide something that I would just take the case, never would have come up digitally, whether it's on Zoom or otherwise. So we are aligned in that thinking, and the value of the job security tied to education. And education is all about, growing and expanding, which requires interacting and sharing ideas and having healthy debate, is kind of where that job security sparks from, at least in my view.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
100% agree. Yeah.
I want to take this two-sided brain idea a little bit further, and I'm going to risk here because this is something that just occurred to me live in the moment, but everybody's talking about AI, and it might not be the AI that everybody's thinking about, but what about analog intelligence, Sandro? What about that one-on-one or that group dynamic of the human intelligence factor? You talk about consistency, you talk about process, you look back on results and what's been produced, and we can draw from data, and we can be informed by that data to kind of give us a roadmap of where we want to navigate and what we might want to achieve at the next step, whether it's near, midterm, long term. But that analog, that content, that contact, share in the context of a heavy tilt towards AI right now. And then in your professional services business, as well as your financial services business, as well as being on stage, whether it's the $1 Million Roundtable, the top of the table in Luxembourg with me in front of meeting professionals in Europe, and how that analog, how that human contact is so much more important now.
Well, so you're speaking today to a 55-year-old classic Gen Xer. So you're asking the wrong guy when it comes to talking about anything that relates to information technology, AI. But here's my take. I don't know, 10 years ago, Seth, I call it an apocalypse du jour. The latest catastrophe of the day that is going to kind of end the world as we know it. It's going to put us all out of business. We're all going to go off in a different direction. And very, very rarely do those prophecies ever ring true. And that leads to a lovely word that I use a lot, which is paradigms. A paradigm is a belief system that has no basis for reality. And already people are speculating as to what AI will do. But let's just take a step back if we can for a second, to add a little bit of perspective here, because some people are saying, totally embrace AI, can see all the good that it will do. There are those that are pushing against it, saying, it's going to wreak havoc. But, it wasn't so long ago that we started using mobile telephones. And before that, I was using a paper map to find my way to clients' houses in the evening. Latterly, we've used Google Maps to find our way around. These are all iterations of progress, of a transition from one place to another in life. It was only 55 years ago that man set foot on the moon. And they say there's more technology in a mobile telephone these days than put Neil Armstrong on the moon. So, on one level, I absolutely embrace technology and what it can do to help. But fundamentally, and I know lots of people will disagree with this, and that's absolutely fine if they do, but I am and always have been a people person. Live events where you get a sense of energy, you get feedback from an audience. You do not get that in any way, shape, or form on any technological platform. And I will go back 10 years to a moment when in financial services, to use that as an example, everyone was saying robo-advice is going to be the new thing. And basically, if you're a financial advisor, pack up and go home because the robots are going to take over the world. And it lasted 5 minutes. And there are still platforms that people can get advice, but these are transactional customers. They are not relationship-based customers. And as far as I'm concerned, and this is my own look into the future, and I'll make this bold statement: nothing will ever replace human interaction, ever.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, you're preaching to the preacher. I'm a 57-year-old Gen Xer. I do my level best to be aware and to the point that I need to understand the newer technologies and adapt and how we're going to adapt it, there is nothing like the human interaction. And that's why it's the other AI, maybe analog intelligence, which is more of the human based. I mean, look, how many times have you been at a speech, Sandro, where you've delivered your presentation, you've prepared, you've taken notes, you've interviewed beforehand, you've studied the industry, you've studied the organization, and you show up as you do the day before, you go to the breakfast, you have a chat with somebody, and you hear a little conversation around the mood of the company or some new initiative within the industry. And it sparks an idea, a slight little angle of something that you might exclude or include in the presentation you're about to give, I don't know, in a half an hour or 2 hours. And you're not going to get that from ChatGPT.
I agree. And actually, as you know, Seth, this is one of, I wouldn't say it's a USP. I don't lay claim to being the only speaker on the planet that gathers that information, that takes the time to have a call with a prospective client. But, I genuinely say to all meeting and event planners, even in the moment I walk up on a stage, if you have got a nugget of information, a current theme, or the CEO who speaks before me says something that is relevant to that audience, I'm weaving into my presentation, because that's another way of connecting with an audience and making it bespoke. Because after all, going back to the value price thing, again, as an event planner in the past, having been responsible for putting on a couple of huge MDRT events, the reality, unfortunately, as you know, Seth, is that too many speakers turn up. They have a canned, pre-prepared presentation. They stick the metaphorical check in their top pocket and they're on the next flight out of there. And okay, if that's what people want to do and that's what people want to pay for, absolutely no problem for me. But the way I see things, and I know the way you see things, is that it's a value proposition where that connection and that interaction and that bespoking is so important.
Well, look, we've both been in the business in different places in the business, you speaking and me booking speakers for 2 decades plus. And I will say that for the better, the tendency, the trend, and the transformation of higher demand, more exigent, if you will, on speakers, content, and how they present is perhaps a function of things being somewhat commoditized, the marketplace being saturated, and a sea of sameness. A lot of speakers, like you said, they're a one-trick pony. They have their one story. They have their slides. They take the check and walk on. Buyers are more savvy. Meeting professionals are more informed. And attendees, their values are demanding more. And you use the word bespoke. We could say tailor. We could say customized. I've even used the word today, artisanal. But whether it's a more structured question and answer session or a breakout that's built off of the larger concepts on a keynote, today's speakers are required to deliver a more tailored, more bespoke presentation that really dials in on what attendees need to take away immediately to make an impact that's going to last in their professional and personal life. I know you do that. I've seen it firsthand. We met virtually years ago over email through a fellow speaker, Allison, and I've watched your journey over time. And I've just seen the demand on speakers in a healthy way to up the level and up their game is a trend that isn't going away. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. Again, I've worked with speakers. I am a speaker, but when I've been involved in these events, I don't, we go back many years during my MDRT journey, Seth, and I've heard, and this is, by the way, I am not knocking any other speaker. I'm not undermining anyone. I have hundreds of very good friends in the NSA and in the PSA in the UK, and they're all terrific. But for me personally, as an event planner, there is a big difference between a story and a message. And I've seen some amazing stories delivered, but as a member of the audience, I come away going, well, that was all great, but like, what was in it for me? How am I going to change as a result of what I've heard? Because Otherwise, stories on their own kind of become a bit self-indulgent, really. And I try, if I can, I have a story, of course. I have plenty of stories because there's lots of failure along the way as well. But what I always try to do is underpin every story with a message, something that people can tangibly take away. And that for me is what I always try to bring to an event. It's the reason I guarantee outcomes, because I don't want people to be paying me to speak at an event or
Right.
do a breakout and
Right.
not take something really valuable away.
Right.
Otherwise, there is no value.
Right.
So it would be very disingenuous of me to talk about value if I didn't deliver it.
Yeah. We had this conversation in person about, those storytellers that are admiration junkies as opposed to those who are committed to delivering, whether it's one or more than one, multiple ideas, concepts, actionable things that people can utilize right away. Take it, make it their own, borrow all of it, a portion of it, but somehow deploy that in their life immediately so that they can expand on their production, their capacities, and optimize their efforts. So, I think you're preaching to the preacher at this point.
Well, I've found, actually, if I look at my life from the time I was growing up, helping my family to entering financial services, and I think one of the things that I loved, that I began to very much love about the business, was that I was producing tangible outcomes for people. Because you create a financial plan and they'd sadly pass away, or they retire, or they'd sell their business, and there was always something of value at the end of that process. And speaking was not something I decided I was going to do. I just achieved some success in my business, and people kept saying to me, you have to share this stuff with as many people as you can. And that's really how I got into it in about 1998 or so, and really started taking it quite seriously in about 2001. But everything, it kind of follows a theme, and that theme is very much about helping people. It's who I am fundamentally. And so I get these lovely, unique opportunities to help audiences, help my clients, help my community. As you know, Seth, I raise a fairly
Yes.
large amount of money for charities. So everything points in the same direction with me. It's about great tangible outcomes.
Yeah. And I think that, coming full circle on your origin story, which is very similar to mine, I'll be the copycat here. That's a great place to finish off. We've come to the end of this episode. I know I'd love to have you back down the road and talk a little bit more about how we work together on future events. But that part of your story where, it seems tragic, and it's a tragedy, and it's no different than there's tragedies all over the world every day. Every person has their form of, some point of inflection that is a departure point that impacts their life and colors things for a while, and how we react and respond to that then determines the story that we take. And, for you to come from whence you did to now with your charity and your philanthropy and standing in front of people and making a promise that at the end of a keynote, they're going to have something actionable to take away, is really a beautiful kind of way to wrap it all together. And then to be on this podcast kind of as brothers in origin stories, if you will, and on a similar journey, albeit on different continents and different accents, the same language, although some would say maybe not even the same language. It's just such an honor and a privilege to have you be a guest with us, and just thank you for your generosity, not only here with our listeners, but all the impact that you've made on people's lives over the years and the ones that you will in the future.
Well, the honor is certainly mine. I'm very humbled by your comments, because it's terrific of you to have me on this podcast, Seth, and you are a terrific guy. And to what we've been talking about, we really connected for the first time when we got together, right? There was a journey before that, but it was all virtual, and there is a massive difference between what we see and what we feel. So
Yeah.
Looking forward to spending more time with you in the future.
Yeah, and I would just be remiss without saying I'm smiling. Not only did our fathers die young and we went from riches to rags, our mother raised 4 kids on their own. But later on in life, we both have twin children. And it's just, it can't even get, I know you play golf, I play tennis, but they're sports of the mind. There is physicality to it, but there's a lot of sport. There's a lot of psychology to it. So the more we're going to work together, I think the more will unfold in our origin stories. And maybe we were twins like Arnold and Danny DeVito. We were twins separated at birth.
Well, that's a thought that we shall leave everyone with.
Yes, we'll leave. I don't know how Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito got into this podcast, but they did somehow.
And I'm not going to fight you over who's who, by the way.
That's good. Well said. Well said. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. For our return listeners, thank you for our first-time listeners. Share and share alike with your neighbors, your postman, your milkman, your pharmacist, your grocer, your family members, your colleagues at work. Spread the word. We appreciate you listening. You've been smarter for it.